Well, we started this in the aftermath of George Floyd, and it was a very interesting time because I felt like it was the first time that the sort of white establishment, right, the power structures, the white power structures in this country, be they government, media, education, corporations, were actually listening to Black concerns about their lived experience. I don't come to this. I mean, what I just said sounds very sort of leftist or woke in a sense. And I was coming at this much more journalistically and factually. I was watching and I thought to myself, this is very interesting. Companies are listening to what Black and brown Americans are saying about their lives. And I'd not witnessed that before. What I'd witnessed historically was they would tell Black and brown Americans and other disenfranchised people that they were not experiencing the suffering they were experiencing. The person would raise their hand and say, "I'm in emotional pain," and the response from the power structure would be, "No, you're not," or "What you're experiencing is in pain." There was a real disconnect. And in the aftermath of George Floyd, there was a paradigm shift. The power structures started to listen. Maybe not enough, maybe not a lot, but a significant enough amount that it caught my attention and a lot of other people. Okay, so I set out to do a film where I was going to sort of look at white America and what did white America mean? And let me tell you something, that's not a film you can make. Everyone disagrees. No one knows what it means. It's deeply personal, and I couldn't get anywhere with it. I got nowhere with it. But what I found was that there was this call and response happening between the media and the politicians. They say a certain thing, and white America would respond, almost like if you poke a on the ground and then it wiggles and then it stops wiggling and you poke it again and then it wiggles again. And it was this call and response. And that I realized was politicians and media were trying to scare that bejesus out of white Americans. They were saying anything that they could to scare them. And why would they do it? Two reasons: power and money. And so I came at this very journalistically. I didn't interview for the film a bunch of liberals and lefties to say, look how bad the Republicans are. Most of the people in the film are Republican operatives. I interviewed Steve Bannon and I said, "Steve, you tell me, how did you get white voters to vote for Donald Trump?" And he told me. I interviewed Sam Nunberg, who worked for Donald Trump, who came up with the idea, the build the wall, the whole thing around building the wall. And he told me, this is what we did. This is how we came up with it. And we traced this all the way back to the Nixon administration, where I mean, Republicans, or not even Republicans, Democrat, anybody, politicians across the political spectrum have been scaring white people for years. But it becomes formulated, it becomes scientific. They start using data in the Nixon administration. He hires people. Nixon hires people who come up with, they write memos, how to divide America. And if we can divide America and get the bigger half, then we can win power. And that is really what begins this long, what is now 55 years of Republican dog whistling. Nobody really, we tried to get Stephen Miller to interview. He wouldn't even answer me. I mean, I couldn't get anywhere with him. Steve Bannon said he would interview with me after I got Hillary Clinton to agree to interview with me. He felt that if she was bringing the gravitas to the film that her name would bring, that he would respond. He also doesn't like her politically. He hates her politically, and I think there was some of that in there too. It's interesting. You go to his house, and all the homes on the street have flowers in front, except the flowers in front of his house were all dead, which was a kind of an interesting little moment in time. But he was very friendly and nice to us. But that doesn't diminish the fact that he used a strategy called the missing white voter to rally political support for Donald Trump. And this strategy leaned into a lot of anti-immigration narratives, which are, I think, divisive. And they make white people, they put space between white people and people of color. And that space is central, I believe, today to what is dividing our nation.
These kind of racial dog whistle politics go back to Nixon. But how would you say these strategies have evolved with the rise of digital media and cable news?
I think they're much better. I mean, Nixon would just say some basic things. I mean, Nixon also was a trailblazer. I mean, Nixon sort of invents the war on crime. Now, Reagan is the one who really turns the war on crime into a massive incarceration machine. I mean, you need to think about the fact that putting Black people in jail doesn't reduce crime. But what it does do is it makes white people think they're getting something done. And so this is this gigantic, the whole, almost, birth to prison mechanism that is created that affects African Americans in such disproportionate ways is a gigantic political strategy because you don't see any significant reductions in crime. You don't see anything but the destruction of the African American family structure, the removal of the chance to pass down wealth to future generations. You basically destroy a community. But what does that do to white voters? The white voters say, "Oh my goodness, this man cares about white people because he's putting all these black people in jail." And this is a real problematic strategy because of the damage it does and the cost it has on the human toll on children and families. Um, so how has it evolved? It started off in kind of a crude way. I mean, I think that now, I mean, you see they are in bed with, I don't know if I can't formally say that anyone's in bed with anybody because I don't really know who calls who on the phone. But there's a huge connectedness between right-wing media and right-wing politics and the way they work together. By the way, you see the same thing in left-wing politics. You see MSNBC and CNN deeply integrated into left-wing politicians, but they're not stoking white fear to win elections. And so that to me is the danger here. You scare these white people enough, they're buying guns. They believe they need guns to keep themselves safe. They want to, separate their families. They want to do all these things, and ultimately they want to do things like put people in jail and stop immigration in ways that are draconian and terrifying. I mean, it becomes very, very scary. Some of the things that we see and that were happening, and it goes much further, which of course the film covers. I hope everyone will see it.
What responsibility do journalists and news organizations have in stopping the spread of racially divisive messaging, even when it's cloaked in political legitimacy?
Listen, I'm a journalist and have been for 25 years. My mother was as well. She wrote for the Chicago Tribune. She didn't really cover hard news. But, I come from a tradition of good hard-nosed reporting, following facts and what have you. And I feel like now, with what we do, everyone is so afraid to honestly report. Everybody wants to either answer the corporate overlords that own their newspaper or media, operation, or they are afraid of what the advertisers are going to think. It's very, very hard to find any sort of semblance of truth in reporting. And I think that the self-reporting, everybody posting on Facebook. I was on a radio show earlier today when a man posted in and he said to me that my film was all wrong because Trump got all the black votes. Now, what am I supposed to do with a piece of nonsense like that? First of all, he hadn't seen my film. And by the way, to her credit, the journalist in charge of that radio show called that person out and said that's not true. But a guy like that can post that on the internet. When I was a kid, there was no internet for him to post that on. So comments like that never made it into the mainstream. Now you can lie and cheat and steal, and we have no accountability. And then the worst offenders, too, are these social media companies who really control huge amounts of data and information going into our brains. And everyone lies and they just sit there. They just sit there because they want even more billions. It can be reduced to that upsetting little model, and that's what it is.
After exposing these long-term, racially charged strategies that politicians and media use, is accountability even possible, sir?
I don't know how you can hold someone accountable for voicing what seem like opinion. I mean, when Stephen Miller goes up there and he says in his mind, and by the way, I wouldn't be surprised if Stephen Miller believes half the stuff he says. I mean, the stories about this guy would make your skin, or what's the phrase, whatever, would get you scared reading about what he does. And I don't know how, if he believes that immigrants are really that evil, and he really believes that immigrants are going to take your jobs and your money and shoot you, he has to have the right to be able to say that because I'm a big free speech guy. But at the same time, it concerns me when I guess the answer is I don't know. I don't know how you hold consequences for what I believe in is free speech. I think the best antidote against bad free speech is more free speech, and that we need to sort of fight this out in the world of ideas. I don't like telling people they can't say certain things, because before you know it, they're going to tell me I can't say something, and it's going to be something that I thought was important to say. So then what are we going to do? Now we've got, and the other part is who's going to police this stuff? Some idiot bureaucrat in Washington? What a nightmare. Who are they going to give that power to? So, before you know it, Stephen Miller will be the chief First Amendment policeman, and that would be terrifying. I think that, first of all, so the film is releases on video on demand, which is Amazon, Apple, all those places, because we all watch movies at home. People don't go to see documentaries in movie theaters. It's just not a place they see them. They watch it at home. So that's where we're doing our big release. You can get it on Amazon, iTunes, not iTunes anymore, Apple on June 3rd. So June 3rd is the one. And when that hits, we want to have a lot of media, and I want to get a lot lot of do it. And what I hope is it spurs conversations. You never know who's going to watch. You never know. Maybe five other documentary filmmakers will want to make follow-ups. Maybe there'll be news pieces getting on shows like yours. And if the more that we can talk about it and the more buzz we can create around the conversation, maybe we can affect some kind of change. Because I think that this divisiveness in America is very, very destructive. And no one really calls it out. We talk about it, but we don't realize that it's planned. This is strategic racism. And that's the scary part of it. It isn't racism by accident. It isn't racism based on hate. It is manufactured hate. And as the phrase that Brian Stelter uses in the film, we have in America a white fear industrial complex where scaring white people is big business. Scaring white people is a billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar business, and it's a way that people hold a grip on massive American power. It's central to why Donald Trump is in office now. He leaned into racial fear-mongering more than any president, certainly that I can recall. And I'm 56. Maybe when I was little, I don't remember. I didn't see the Nixon administration. I was like a little baby. I wish that I could say we were going to get better. Maybe we will get better, but I think before we get better, we're going to get worse. I mean, one thing you see in Europe is that sometimes they have the ability to correct their bad behaviors. Sometimes I feel like we don't seem to do that in our political dialogues. Our political dialogues is a race to the bottom, and people just get nastier and nastier. This guy, maybe we'll get some more polite people. Whoever thought that we would miss people like, Mitt Romney and George Bush or Bill Clinton, who, they said their share of problematic things. I mean, and by the way, Clinton did some racial dog whistling too with Sister Soldier, but that was to quote Hillary Clinton, that was like what did she say in my film? She said something like, these people were children compared to what they're doing now. I mean, what they're doing now is like it's not dog whistling 2.0, it's dog whistling 8.0. I mean, they are incredible. They are incredible. And it's violent and it's destructive and it leads to people's lives being harmed and often destroyed. And that's too bad.